On March 23, 2021, public health and law enforcement officials and community advocates testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on ways to reduce gun violence. The hearing focused on ways to improve the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, and implement other policies such as universal background checks and so-called loophole closures and waiting periods for firearm purchases. I've been doing this long enough to know that the mainstream media will only show you the anti-gun side of these arguments. So over the next few days, I'm going to be showing you the other side of these arguments. A universal background check would make it illegal for you to give or sell one of your guns to a cousin or a friend without first making them pay to have a gun store transfer the gun to them after doing a background check. For years, I've argued that this wouldn't do anything to reduce gun violence, because the vast majority of mass shooters passed background checks to get their guns. And I also argue that a national gun registry is the only way to effectively enforce a universal background check system. In the following video, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri questions Amy Sewer of the Heritage Foundation on how a law enforcement official would know if a transfer or sale of a gun between two private people had a background check under the universal background check system.
We're hearing a lot about universal background checks and how important they are to make sure that private parties don't exchange weapons, sell weapons among themselves without getting a check. I'm just wondering, how does this work in practice? I mean, how do you know if it's private parties and not registered licensed sellers, but two private individuals? How does law enforcement, when they go to enforce a universal background check requirement between private persons, how do they know that there's actually that the relevant transactions have been recorded? I mean, how do you actually make this work in practice?
Senator, thank you for your question, and I think you hit at one of the biggest problems with enforcement of these laws is that the way that they work is primarily retrospective in nature, that a crime is committed and then we have, law enforcement has access to the gun, they look at it and they say, okay, where did this come from? And they sort of backtrack and figure out it was done illegally through a private sale, or even if you were to pass H.R. 8, for example, that individual did not go through a background check, and then you retrospectively punish that individual. It doesn't do a whole lot prospectively to stop those transactions. So even if you look at, again, things like private sales through what I would call publicly advertised private sales, things like Arms List or Craigslist sales, those types of things, the way that the law is written and the way that most of these laws are written is that it doesn't stop the public advertisement of these sales, and there's no way of actually tracking, did this person who advertised this meet up and go through a background check? And frankly, the people who are already willing to break current laws are going to continue to break those laws. They're not going to say, oh, well, the government said I have to go through a background check to do this, when they're already willing to sell to criminals or to skirt those laws. Just because it's doubly illegal is not going to matter to them.
I just wonder where this is headed. I mean, where are we actually going with these proposals? It seems to me that the way, if you really want a universal background check law to be truly effective and enforceable, you've got to have some kind of a firearm registry. I mean, you've got to actually know what firearms are out there, how they're registered, where they're changing hands. I mean, otherwise, between private parties, for the reasons you've just articulated, it doesn't seem like it's going to be terribly effective. So is that where we're headed towards here in order to make this effective at the end of the day?
Senator, that would seem to be the case. And this is not me advocating for a registry, but it would seem to be the case that, if the concern is private transfers, the best way of even retrospectively enforcing that is through a sort of gun registry. But again, this starts hitting at other problems where trust is broken down between gun owners and frankly, the government, where there is this fear when you have politicians going around saying, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, that any sort of gun registration system is going to be used in the future as sort of the launching pad for the next step and then the next step and then the next step.
Yeah, and we know that comment about it taking away your AR-15, and we know that that's not hypothetical in the sense that we've had pretty much the entire party that sits on the other side of this dais advocating in their presidential primaries last year, right through the presidential election, talking about the need to take away the guns of law-abiding citizens. I mean, many of them advocating a national gun registry. So this isn't something that's a hypothetical. This is something I think is a very real and distinct possibility. Dr. Hupp, let me just ask you to comment on this. I mean, do you want to weigh in as someone who has seen this personally? What's your view here of where this is headed, where these proposals are headed?
Well, I think it's interesting that, in this country, we recognize that thousands of people die in car accidents every year. But at the same time, we are cognizant of the fact that people use their vehicles on a daily basis for good purposes, millions and millions of times. I think it's interesting that when we talk about gun usage, nobody ever mentions the fact that guns are used defensively. It's estimated about 2.5 million times per year. So it's very difficult for us to count how many lives have been saved. It's kind of hard to count a negative. I think it's just very important that we look at history, and we know that there is a tendency for governments to become overwhelming at times. And so, yes, I think there is a fear amongst many of us that we would create that fertile ground for future confiscation. I think the one witness made it very clear. He said, you can't have, I believe he said, you can't have gun violence if there aren't any guns. And I think essentially that's what many on the other side would prefer.
Today, there was another growing gun confiscation request in all 50 of our states requesting to confiscate our AR-15s. We want the government to know what would happen if they tyrannically passed their so-called assault weapons ban. I will not comply is a symbolization of defiance against politicians, anti-gunners, and any other tyrannical entity looking to deprive you or your Second Amendment right as put forth in the Constitution of the United States. I'm sure the YouTube algorithm is going to do a phenomenal job of suppressing this message. So please share this video with as many people as you can so we can beat the algorithm and get our two-way message out to the masses. Also, don't forget to like this video and leave a comment and hit the bell and subscribe button. Let my voice be your voice and let them know you want to keep America tactical, because the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed wasn't a suggestion, it was a directive. Also, if you're wondering where to purchase your AR-15s are essential, I will not comply. I am the militia. I lost all my guns in a boating accident, and your state-specific Keep America Tactical shirt, click the link next to my head or the link in the description section. Or if you're watching this on a mobile device, tap the small triangle on the lower right-hand side of this video and click the link in the description.